weeks ago, I started a series that I've been calling the I Pressed On series. Paul, in writing to the church in Philippi, to the Philippians, he writes in chapter 3 and verse 14, he says, there's one thing that I do. There's one thing, but I think you're kind of maybe above everything else. There's this one thing that I do, forgetting what has already taken place, forgetting what is behind. He says, I press on. I press on. I sometimes wonder, what was it that made Paul want to stay in ministry? What was it that made Paul not want to give up? Because whenever you read about what Paul went through, whenever you read through the book of Acts, how he had this amazing conversion in chapter 9 where he was blinded and where he was healed. And Paul was like zealous for Judaism. Paul was zealous for the law. And he used to go out and used to persecute Christians, have them put in prison and even put to death because he was so religious in his mindset. And Paul became a Christian, he became a follower of Jesus, had this amazing conversion, and began to become one of the main players in establishing the early church. And you can read about his journey through the book of Acts. But Paul writes, as he's writing to the Corinthians, in his second letter to the Corinthians, he kind of gives a breakdown of some of the stuff that he's been through and begins to talk about how many times he'd been put in prison, and how many times he'd been beaten, how many times he'd been whipped, about getting the 40 lashes minus one, about how many times he'd been without food, he'd been hungry and without clothes and cold at night times and nowhere to stay. And he gives this breakdown of everything that he's been through as a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And sometimes, in today, whenever you look at the Western world, we don't boast about those things. We kind of look about how many followers can we get on Instagram and how many likes can we get on Facebook and social media and things like that there. But Paul's saying, listen, this is what it's going to take. In order for the gospel to advance, this is what it's going to take. We're going to face persecution. How are we going to handle the difficult times in our lives, the things that come against us that we were never expecting? How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to handle it? And Paul says, and I think one of the keys for growing in Christ, for Paul pursuing him, is ministry. He says, forgetting what is past, I press on. Sometimes, church, that's all it comes down to, is having this desire just to press on. Having this desire, you know what? I'm going to be in church on Sunday morning. Having this desire, I'm going to go to the prayer meeting. Having this desire, I'm going to press on in God. Sometimes that's all it comes down to. We want to tend to maybe over-spiritualize things. I need this type of prayer. I need that type of prayer. And I need to do this or I need to do that. Sometimes you just got to say, you know what? I'm not going to give up. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care how difficult it's getting. I don't care what's coming against me. Whether I've been put in prison, whether I've been beaten, whether I've been receiving the 40 lashes minus one, and whether things aren't going my way, I press on. That's it. Are we going to resolve just to press on, church? Or are we just going to be, you know what, I'll see how I feel. I'll see how I feel. I read Andrew Willis, good friend of ours. He's preached in this church many times in Texas. And he talked about last week or the week before, last Sunday or the Sunday before, whenever everything really started to crumble apart in Afghanistan. And he said, we owe our Afghanistan brothers and sisters, we owe it to them to get out to church on Sunday. Because right around the world, there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of our brothers and sisters that are being persecuted for their faith, but they still get out to church on Sunday. And we make it so easy in this country. Well, I can't be bothered going today, but I'll catch up with it on Facebook. I'll see it back on YouTube. We gotta be determined, church. We gotta have this resolve. I press on. I press on. I put a post up on Facebook just to get some feedback, and you will have little cards there on your chairs. And on one side of the card it says, life is about. And you can complete that sentence. Life is about. So I had a number of different responses on what people were saying life was about. Some obviously, I got to give the winner, for me, I think has to go to Anita. And because I said, life is about, complete this sentence. And Anita's response, let me just find it here, was something like 15 to 30 years, depending on the crime. Thank you for that, Anita. Some people said life is for living, or life is about living. Life is about complete submission to God. My friend Gareth Brocklebank in England says life is about getting other people to finish your sentences for you. Some people said life is about family. Sammy Anderson, life is about serving. Number of people, life is about Jesus. Life is about experiencing the peace of God. Life is about living beyond the cross. Somebody was listening. There's always that one. Life is about hope. Paula Crawford, life is about learning to dance in the storms, rejoice in the triumphs, serve the Lord with a thankful heart, and always be kind. Life is about family. Life is about keeping it simple. Kelly, enjoying what you have and praise God for everything you have and everything you don't have. Good one. Bradley, life is about serving with true humility, rejoicing in the storms as well as those sunny days. Our friend Jilly Harvey, we should have prayed for Jilly this morning. Jilly, we're praying for you. We are praying for you. Should have had your name down this morning. Jilly, old friend from Ballysill and Elam days, is in a hospital with cancer, and Jilly, we are praying for you, and we will continue to pray for you. We are with you in everything that you're going through. Avril, life is about knowing God. From this, everything flows. That's sonum bonum. See, Avril was listening to me. You had Andrew listening to you. Avril was listening to me. Sonum bonum is a Latin phrase. It's about what's the highest thing that you can do, the greatest thing that you can do, out of which everything else flows. Pursue God. Worship Him. Make everything about Him. Let me give you the answer. One person got the answer right, and that was Gail Hunter. And Gail said, life is about choices. And for me, life is about choice. Do you know that before you came out here, the day before you sat on that chair, that you probably made like 100 choices? And you didn't even realize it. You decided what time you were going to get up at. You decided whether or not you were going to get up. You decided whether you were going to get a shower or not, or whether you were going to get a bath, or whether you were even going to get washed at all, some of you. You decided whether you were going to wear deodorant. You decided whether you were going to wear aftershave or perfume, and what type of perfume and what type of aftershave. Whether you were going to comb your hair, brush your hair, dry your hair with a hairdryer. You decided what socks you were going to wear, what shoes you were going to wear, what clothes you were going to wear, what type of jeans you were going to wear, what type of shirt you were going to wear. You decided what you were going to have for breakfast. You decided how much milk you were going to put in your cereal, how much cereal you were going to have. You made 100+ choices even just before you got to breakfast, and you didn't even realize it. And there's a lot of things that people have said their life is about Jesus, but it always comes down to choice. Do you choose Jesus? Life is about family. Do you choose it to be about family? Whatever someone says about what life is about, it always then, for me, comes down to, is that what you're going to choose? And so Paul is saying, there's one thing I do, forgetting what is behind, I press on. I think that Paul was making a choice to press on. Because pressing on requires choice. Everything that you do in your life will require a choice. Paul is saying, I'm choosing to leave this behind, and I'm choosing to press on to what is in front, to what is ahead. It all comes down to choice. What are you going to choose? Life is about. And so I've given you little cards there, so you can fill it in if you want. You can take my answer. That's okay. I don't mind. Or you can fill out your own, Joanne. You can make your own answer up. It'll be wrong, because it always comes down to choice. So you can write on there, life is about. What is your life going to be about? And then in the back, I've written down 3 things there. I choose to, I choose to, I choose to. What are you going to choose to do now with your life? how you going to live your life? What choices are you going to make in your life? Paul says, I'm choosing to press on. Life is about making choices. But I think that we've got to make wise choices. We've got to make right choices. Because I think part of the problem of life is that a number of you make wrong choices. Not me. I'm very good with choices. Okay. We're all pretty bad with choices. But we could save ourselves a whole ton of heartache if we just made better choices. We could save ourselves so much trouble in life if we just made better choices, if we just made wiser choices. Some of the men were together on Monday afternoon as part of the Ezra team. If you want to join us, then you can join us. It's not just for men, it's for anybody from 1 o'clock tomorrow. And we were talking about making choices against ourselves. So whatever it is we may feel, well, I don't feel like it, therefore I'm not to, but we've got to make a choice against ourselves. And in spite of the feelings, that we're still going to make an effort. We're going to make the right choice. We may not feel like it, but we've got to make that choice and have a resolve in our hearts and a determination that that's what we're going to do. Sometimes we've got to make choices against ourselves. And if we can make better choices in life, we will save ourselves so much more heartache further on down the line. And sometimes we live carrying the regret of choices that we have made. And this is where I love why Paul says, I'm leaving that behind and I'm looking on to what is in front, so I'm pressing on. But what we do so often, that's why I'm so glad that Rod sang that song this morning about a breaking. Because as we become Christians, as we become followers of Jesus, then we tend to bring this stuff with us because it's difficult to let go of. Let's be honest, it's difficult to put down and it's difficult to let go of. Sometimes we carry this stuff with us. It's so hard to shake off. It's so hard to break that and to let it go. And it's so difficult just to be honest and say, you know what? I'm leaving that behind and be like Paul and saying, I'm pressing on. And sometimes we live here. We live in these moments of these decisions that we made. But I want to tell you today that God is a God of now. God is a God of right now. John, whenever he preached a number of months ago that made him sick, unfortunately, and Ruth doesn't allow him to preach anymore. But he talked about Jesus Christ being the same yesterday, today, and forever. So yes, he is the God of yesterday, but he's also the God of today. He's the God of right now. In this moment, he's the God right now. What decision and what choice will you make now? Because here's the thing, you can't do anything about this. This is done. The decisions that you made back here are done. You can't go back in time and change this. And you're actually not guaranteed tomorrow. The only moment that you're ever guaranteed in life is always right now. It's the only moment that you're ever guaranteed. Right here, right now. You can't guarantee that you'll be here next Sunday. There's a good probability that some of us will be here next Sunday. Some of us will be watching on Facebook. That's okay. But the probability is that we will all make it through another week. But we're not guaranteed of that. All you're guaranteed of is right now. What choice will you make right now? That's done. So you can't go back in time to that moment where you signed that bit of paper or give your life away to something, to some cause, signed up to something that put you on a road. All you have is right now. And right now, you can change the course of your life. You can change the path that you're on. You can change the direction of your life. Paul says, forgetting what is behind, I'm pressing on. So we got to make right choices because choices carry consequences. Every choice that you make carries a consequence. And the bigger the choice, the greater the choice, then the greater the consequences. And sometimes those consequences don't just fall on us. Sometimes that the shadow of that consequence falls to our children and to our children's children. Sometimes the shadow of those decisions, the consequences, can fall so far. Our country is living in the consequences of decisions that were made during the Troubles. And our children and our children's children are still dealing with the consequences of the Troubles, even though there was a peace agreement signed over 25 years ago. Yet we're still living in the shadow of the Troubles. And so our choices carry consequences. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, let me see if I can find it here, if I can pull it up. It's just a few scriptures about choices and about what we choose. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 30, if you pick it up from verse 15, it says, "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you're not obedient, and if you're drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, then I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you're crossing the Jordan to enter." So what God is saying to the Hebrews, to the Jews at that time, as he was establishing the nation of Israel, he had given them his law, and he said, look, if you follow and if you're obedient to me, things are going to go well. As a consequence of a good choice that you make for your life, things are going to go well. But if you make a bad decision, if you turn away from me and you begin to do your own things and you begin to follow these false gods that don't exist, then things aren't going to go so good. There are consequences to your choices. Let me share a couple of stories very quick, and then we're going to finish, of people who made good choices and bad choices in the Bible. Saul was the first king of Israel. David was the second king of Israel. David is regarded as Israel's greatest king. And they both messed up. They both made bad decisions. They both made bad choices and wrong choices. David's choices were actually a heck of a lot worse. His bad decisions were actually a heck of a lot worse than what Saul's were. But the difference between Saul and David is that Saul wasn't very repentant of the bad decisions that he had made. Saul began to make excuses for the decisions he had made. Whenever he made a wrong choice or a wrong decision, then he would blame someone else, or he'd say, well, yes, but. Whereas David, who did so much more wrong, fell down on his knees and cried out in repentance to God, "I've sinned against God and against heaven." Saul was unrepentant. David was repentant. David has an affair with a woman called Bathsheba. As a consequence of that choice, Bathsheba becomes pregnant. And so David calls Bathsheba's husband back from the front lines where he was fighting. He was a leader in the army of Israel at that time. And he calls him off the lines of battle. And he calls him back to Bathsheba in the hope that something's going to go on there and he'll be able to pass it off as Uriah's. And that doesn't happen. Uriah stays with his troops. And so David makes an arrangement where he sends Uriah away out to the very front lines where he knows Uriah's not going to survive. And so as a consequence of David's poor choices, Bathsheba gets pregnant. Uriah ends up dead on the front lines. And the child dies. David goes into mourning. Consequences of choices. The prodigal son makes a bad choice, makes a bad decision, goes to the father and says, "I want my inheritance now." The father gives it to him, and he goes and he squanders everything. He wastes everything, and he ends up in a pig pen as a result, as a consequence of his choices. He ends up in the pig pen. But then he makes a right choice. "I will go back to my father's house." In that moment, the God of now, the prodigal son, makes a right choice. that changes his life, that changes the direction of his life. He could have stayed in the pig pen. Things could have even gotten worse for him, but he makes a decision in that moment. I'm going to go back to my father's house. Joseph constantly made good choices. I find Joseph remarkable. I really do. Because of everything that has happened to him. Sold into slavery by his own brothers. In fact, first of all, they throw him into a pit because they're going to kill him. His own brothers are going to murder him. They throw him into a pit, sell him into slavery, and he goes from the pit into Potiphar's house, where Potiphar's wife begins to cry out, he's raped me, and it was lies. And he ends up in prison. And he hasn't done anything wrong. Joseph is a stand-up guy. He's done absolutely nothing wrong. It goes from the pit, the Potiphar, to the prison. But he continues to make right choices in the midst of everything. And as a result and a consequence of making good choices, he ends up in the palace, leading things in Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh. I love Daniel. In Daniel chapter 1, Daniel is taken, worship team, you can come. In Daniel chapter 1, Daniel is taken as taken from Judea. He's a Hebrew, he's a Jew, and he's taken captive from Judea, from his home, and he's brought to Babylon. And a number of young men were marched out of Jerusalem and marched out of Judea and out of Judah and were brought to Babylon. And while in Babylon, they're going to be trained up because they're going to be looking after the affairs of Babylon and things like that. And Daniel learns the language. He learns the customs. There's things that he learns to do while in Babylon. But there's this moment where food is brought for them to eat. And it's straight off the king's table. It's meat. It's good food. This is what the king eats. And it says in Daniel chapter 1 that Daniel resolved in his heart not to partake, not to eat of the king's food. There was something about the food that Daniel knew. I cannot touch this. I cannot eat this. Rod, you can play whenever you're ready, bro. Daniel resolved in his heart, I'm not going to, a choice. I'm making a choice. I'm not going to touch this food. Whether it was food that was sacrificed to idols or there was just something about it that Daniel knew, I can't do this. I can't touch this food. And the prison guards are like, well, this is from the king's table, and if we don't feed you, then we're going to end up in trouble. And Daniel makes a deal with him. Look, let's go 10 days here and we'll see how things go. And Daniel looks in better shape than everybody else that is eating the food. We got now today what's known as the Daniel fast. But Daniel resolved in his heart. What do we have to resolve in our heart, church? See, on that card that I've given you, it says, I choose to. Whatever you put at the end of that sentence, however you complete that sentence, I choose to, then you need to resolve in your heart, this is what I'm going to pursue. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to seek. Because whatever choices that we make carry consequence. And as a consequence of Daniel's choice, Daniel has these amazing revelations from God. One of the most amazing books that you can read in the Bible is the book of Daniel when it comes to prophecy and about what is about to take place. As a result of that good choice and that good decision, all of these amazing things happen in the life of Daniel. Let me finish with this. Adam and Eve. The first story that happens in the Bible, the first story that we read of in the Bible, is the story of creation. It's the very first thing that we read about in Genesis. It's the story of creation. The second thing that we read about in the Bible, the first story about people on this earth after they're created, after it shows us that God created us, the first story about mankind on this earth, it's about a bad choice. It's about a choice that was made by Adam and Eve to be disobedient toward God. God told them there will be a consequence of your actions. If you choose to be disobedient, it says you can have you eat of any tree in this garden, but see, of that one tree, you don't touch it. And they made a bad choice. And as a consequence of that bad choice, we're still under the shadow of those consequences today, of death, of disease, of destruction. We're still living in a world that carries those things. That was their choice. Let me tell you about God's choice. Because God's choice was Jesus. God chose to send his Son to this earth to die on a cross, to rectify the bad choice that was made in the Garden of Eden. One day he will return to this earth, that same Jesus, and will put everything completely and totally right. But God chose Jesus. God's choice was his Son. That's the story of the gospel. Because there are people that I think whenever they think about God, and they think about the Bible and the message that we preach, is that it's all negative, and God is this God that just wants to punish people and wants to tell people exactly what to do. No, he is a caring, loving God who sent his Son to this world to be punished on our behalf. Jesus' choice was to come. Jesus' choice was to come to this earth and allow himself to be nailed to that cross for us. So God's choice was Jesus. Jesus' choice was to come. And Jesus' choice is you. In this place today, Jesus chooses you. That's his choice. Because ultimately, this is what this whole cross thing is all about. Is that he takes our punishment. He chooses to take our punishment. And he chooses to give us his kingdom. And he chooses you today. He chooses you. Regardless of the choices that you have ever made, regardless of how many times that you have rejected him, regardless of the fact that you have maybe wanted to do your own thing and go your own way, yet he still chooses you. And so today, I ask the question, what will be your choice? I choose to accept Jesus. I choose to follow him. I choose to pursue him. I choose to worship him. I choose to seek him with everything that I have. I choose Jesus. And I just pray today that that will be our choice. That it won't just be I choose Jesus in order to become a Christian, but every single day of our lives, I choose Jesus. I choose Jesus.